Ladies and gentlemen, we're live. I'm super excited today for the show. We're going to learn something from a philosopher, and you probably never heard some of this stuff. If you have, stay tuned. I will be taking questions, of course, and things like that, but we're going to let everybody trickle in. Let's get that 30-second countdown happening. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Derek Lambert. If you're not familiar with MythVision podcast, we do all sorts of stuff, okay? There's not a thing we probably don't do here at MythVision. And today we're going to explore metaphysical idealism with Bernardo Kastrup. But before we do, I figure I'll defeat the dragon so that there's no enemies trying to stop us today. We are MythVision. Welcome to MythVision Podcast. Your host, Derek Lambert. I'm excited. I'm excited because the guy I'm bringing on knows more than I probably ever will in this topic, and we're going to be learning a lot from him. And before we do, let's go ahead and just introduce him. Dr. Bernardo Kastrup, welcome to MythVision Podcast, sir.
Pleasure to be here, Derek.
Well, thank you for joining me. I'd like to, if you don't mind, and this is kind of rude of me to ask you if you don't mind explaining your credentials, giving us a little bit of your expertise, what you have, your expertise in, and then I'd like to let everyone know some of the plugs, if you will.
Sure. My original education, my first education is computer science, computer engineering. I have a doctorate in computer engineering, and I have another doctorate in philosophy of mind and ontology. And I've been writing about these topics for quite a while. I have some background in physics. I don't have a doctorate in physics, but I used to work at CERN in Switzerland in that world of high energy physics. So a little bit of background there as well. And these things all come together when you're talking about the nature of reality, the nature of mind. Computer science comes to the mix, philosophy comes to the mix, and a little bit of foundations of physics as well.
Interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, check it out. So we've got a couple websites here, but first I'll poke on, here's his YouTube channel. It's down in the description. Go hit that bell and subscribe if you're interested in seeing more about what he's going to talk about today. He's going to probably barely scratch the surface. I hope to get some of the questions in, and of course, take your super chats to get your questions. So go subscribe to his YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit the bell, because if you don't, it won't ring when it's time for you to watch a video he drops. Also, he has a website here, and he goes into a lot of different topics. I've actually seen you on Miguel Connor's channel. He has a channel. Of course, he's a good friend of mine as well. I think we might disagree on some things, but that's totally okay. What's the world if we all agreed with the same ideas? It's just no fun. Also, when you refresh this screen, I might as well hit home here. There's actually a course, Analytic Idealism course. You can go. It'll take you here to a 6-part course. You said this is free, correct?
That's free. Everything on Essentia Foundation's website is free.
Awesome. So this can be watched, and you might not want to play it at 2 times speed. We were talking about that. You might want to absorb what he says and try to keep up with it. There's a lot of material there. He's on Twitter. Go show him love on Twitter if my Twitter will ever load. There we go. And you guys can follow him on Twitter. Look at the cash. Okay. So yeah, check him out there. And then look, ladies and gentlemen, I've got a Patreon. For everybody who doesn't know, I've dropped tons and tons of videos early for MythVision Podcast. And now let's have fun. I think the important part, most of all, is to say up front, I'm not a philosopher. I'm a layperson who just tries to learn everything he can. I am a skeptic. I'm someone who doesn't believe people rise from the dead physically. I don't believe people literally walk on water. I'm not like I know with certainty. It's all based on probability, but these things don't happen. This isn't the norm. And So I approach the biblical context often on this channel, but there's lots of mythologies in the world. And I say, did that really happen? Did this really, did that literally? No. So I'm a skeptic in that respect. And I'm also somebody who doesn't believe in God, right? I don't say it's not possible, but I personally don't. However, what you're going to do today might confuse me a bit, and that's okay. I'm interested and open-minded to hearing what you present, what metaphysical idealism is. I got a gist from watching a little bit of your channel's videos and interviews where mind precedes matter and what that means. So I've had other people on my channel. I've talked with Lawrence Krauss. I've talked to Michael Shermer. I've talked to some of these skeptics. And I look at this and I say, are there natural explanations? The crazy thing about you, Dr. Kastrup, is that you're like, yes, there are natural explanations. However, I'm not a materialist. And I'm like, hold on, man, now you just confused me. So please introduce us to the topic. I'm interested in finding out how you view the world and how we can understand what you're saying. So we'll go from there.
Sure. Look, I am an extreme naturalist, reductionist, skeptic in the true meaning of the word. And I'm biased towards reason and evidence. And I admit that to people who come at these issues from an introspective, an intuitive perspective, meditation, a religious insight. I respect all that, but that's not my thing. It has not been my path. It's not how my mind is put together. And I am not a materialist. Yes, because I think materialism has been reduced to absurdity. If you look at the logic of the situation, if you look at the empirical evidence we now have available from foundations of physics, neuroscience of consciousness, there are so many different and independent reasons why materialism or mainstream physicalism just not only doesn't answer the questions, it creates problems that we know now cannot be solved in principle. So upon realizing that with my work on a little bit of AI for a few years, some work on foundations of physics and thinking about these things, I was very eager to find an alternative because I couldn't live with that void of not having a plausible story about the nature of reality. And that's how I came to idealism. It was the only alternative I found or could formulate that I thought accounts for the empirical facts, is internally logically consistent, coherent, and explains things. So the point of this alternative is that the world, nature at large, is mental in essence. That doesn't mean that it's in your mind alone, or my mind alone. That doesn't mean that the nature is deliberate and has a plan and has figured out how to run the show. I'm not saying any of these things. I'm not saying that this transpersonal mind has higher level mental functions that allow it to self-reflect and plan and deliberate and pass judgment, moral judgment on what people are doing. So you have to pay attention not only to what I'm saying, but to what I'm not saying, because it's very easy to project all kinds of things that people think I might be saying. So I'm just saying that there is a probably instinctive, very simple form of mind that underlies our nature and which presents itself to our observation in the form we call the material or the physical world, because evolution has equipped us with a dashpan of instruments, which we call the screen of perception, to sense states of the external world so we can survive. But that dashboard is necessarily encoded and inferential. So we don't have a transparent window into the world. We wouldn't be able to maintain our structural integrity if we had that. We wouldn't be able to survive the pressures of natural selection if we had that. All of this has been shown beyond doubt mathematically as well. So what we have is an encoded dashboard of instruments, and that dashboard is what we call the physical world. But the world as it is in itself, in and of itself, behind, before, or independent of observation, I would propose it is essentially mental or experiential. Again, that doesn't mean that it's some form of God sitting on a throne and drafting the destinies of every single person. I think it's a naturalistic mind, a naturalistic transpersonal form of mentation, probably instinctive or instinctual, because the laws of nature are so regular and predictable. That's the hallmark of an instinctive mind, very simple, with a variety of states, but not higher level mental functions. And I think this accounts much better for the evidence. Well, it accounts for the evidence at all, because physicalism doesn't. Physicalism proposes a completely different ontological entity that is conceptually defined under the name matter. It's supposed to have no inherent qualities. It's supposed to be exhaustively describable through quantities, and somehow through a step of magic that nobody has been able to explicitly pin down,
Right.
that thing is supposed to produce qualities.
If I may, this is a good question, because this, bear with me, I am obviously not on your level when it comes to this depth of understanding when it comes to this stuff. So bear with me, and the audience, bear with me. Okay, I'm a knucklehead. Just give me a break. The question I have, though, I'm keeping up with what you're saying here. I'm not like a guy who opposes you. So I'm going to be like kind of devil's advocate. I'd like to get your responses. And this is as a friend.
So feel free to shoot. I don't mind.
No. I'm not shooting. I do want you to, work with me a little, because I'm not an antagonist. That's just not my character. I'm not that kind of guy. I like to learn and hear how people take different things. What would it take? Like, suppose hypothetically we were able to somehow mix matter components that's not a living organism, and let's say we experimentally came up with abiogenesis. Let's say we are able to create a very, very simple life form from matter, multiple things of matter, or a silicone-based type. Let's say, hypothetically, we were able to create something somehow, and it now has awareness and consciousness somehow. Okay, how that happens, I know you're already going, there's problems in what you're asking, but I'm saying, what if we could? Would that change potentially the idea that mind must come before matter? Or could a materialist world then potentially be true if that were the case?
There's a lot folded in your question, so we have to unpack this. Do I doubt that one day we will be able to achieve abiogenesis, to create life from non-life? I don't doubt. I think it will happen.
Wow.
I don't think we are close, despite the latest attempt from Craig Venter, with synthesized DNA and all that. He always starts from a already living cell infrastructure and he replaces the DNA. But I think it will probably happen in this century, that we will create a living being out of a non-living substrate. I think that living being will have a private inner life of its own, a conscious inner life of its own. I don't think any of that would contradict what I'm saying, because if you really go, for instance, through the course, you will see that nothing in this contradicts what I'm saying. I think living beings are the extrinsic appearance of dissociative processes in this one spatially unbound field of subjectivity that I propose underlies nature. That's why we think that we are separate from the rest. That's why we seem to have private conscious inner life. It's because we are dissociated, which is a well-known phenomenon in psychiatry. We are dissociated from the rest of this mind that underlies nature. So life, I would say, is the image of that dissociative process. It is what that dissociative process looks like on the screen of perception. So creating life from non-life would basically mean inducing dissociation in this underlying field of subjectivity. And I see no a priori reason why that shouldn't be possible. Now, the other part of your question was, what if we make a computer conscious? That I don't think we will succeed in, because if you look at all the entities in nature that we have reason to believe have private conscious inner life of their own, because their behavior seems to suggest that we can compare their behavior to our own, and we have that intuition. Now, that seems to be the behavior of a being with conscious inner life. Even a paramecium swims away from its enemies, swims after food, and it displays different states of mind, so to say. If you're creative enough to try to perceive that by looking at a paramecium, all of these entities have one thing in common. Each and every one of them, they metabolize. In other words, they burn ATP, they do protein folding, transcription, all this good stuff that we call metabolism, and it's identical in them and in us. Although life has an unfathomable variety of forms and behaviors, there is this one underlying thing that is identical across all life, metabolism. So to me, this is a strong cue that in nature, dissociated complexes of this universal field of mentation appear to observation as metabolizing organisms. I don't think a computer metabolizes. A
Right.
computer is a simulation of the function or behavior of a metabolizing organism. But a simulation is not the phenomenon itself. I mean, I like to use this analogy often. I can simulate kidney function on my computer accurately down to the molecular level. That doesn't mean that my computer will urinate on my desk, because a simulation of kidney function is not kidney function.
Right.
It's just it replicates certain regularities and patterns on a completely different substrate. So a simulation is not the phenomenon. So I don't see any reason to think that a simulation of a being with conscious inner life will itself have conscious inner life, for the same reason that a simulation of kidney function on my computer will not urinate on my desk.
So let me ask you this, and it sounds like there's a metaphysical mind underlying all reality that when I call reality, I guess I could say observable material matter, if you will. My question is that mind not material matter? And why is matter, in your worldview, if you will, from your perception, why does matter then now take on a conscious state if the mind itself is not matter? You see what I'm trying to get at? Like,
Yeah. I don't think matter takes on a conscious state. I think matter is the appearance of a certain configuration of conscious states. Look, any worldview, any opinion about the nature of reality is metaphysical in nature, because metaphysics is about the being of things, what things are in and of themselves. Science doesn't study that. Science studies the behavior of things, what nature does, how nature behaves, because that's what experiments inform us of. You set up a set of initial conditions, you press play, nature goes, behaves in a certain way, and then you learn something about nature through behavior. But materialism is a metaphysics, because under materialism, the colors, the world of qualities we see around us is entirely inside our heads, because all those qualities are generated by our brains. And what's behind those qualities, the metaphysics of the world, that which stands behind the screen of perception, under materialism is conceptually defined as an entity that can be exhaustively described through a list of numbers. In other words, if you have a long enough list of numbers, you will have said everything there is to say about that entity, which is called matter. I deny that what we colloquially call matter is that entity, because otherwise I would have this huge problem of trying to derive how qualities emerge out of something that is defined as having nothing to do with qualities. That's an internal contradiction in materialism. They define matter as something purely quantitative, and then they try to extract qualities out of that which, to begin with, has been defined as having nothing to do with qualities, only with quantities. We call it the hard problem of consciousness. It's not a problem, it's just the revelation of an internal contradiction of a certain conceptual system that doesn't work. So every theory of nature will postulate that there is something behind what we think the world is. Under materialism, the world that we think is out there is not, is inside our heads, because it's a qualitative world, and out there are no qualities. Under idealism, the world of qualities we see is a sort of dashboard. It's a measurement of what is really out there. It's phenomena instead of noumena. It's how the thing in itself presents itself to our observation, but this presentation or this representation is not the thing in itself. It's just the appearance of the thing in itself. It's what it looks like. And the thing in itself under analytic idealism would itself be qualitative, mental. And then what you have is a situation in which a certain set of qualities, the world as it is in itself, modulates another set of qualities, what appears on my screen of perception. There is no hard problem in that. We know different qualities modulate each other all the time. Your thoughts have a certain quality, and they influence your emotions. They can trigger emotions, and your emotions have a totally different quality. So there you go. A set of qualities modulates a totally different set of qualities. We know it happens. It's happening in us all the time. The point of idealism is to say that's what's happening behind the screen of perception. It's one set of transpersonal mental qualities modulating a personal set of mental qualities that I call my world.
Real quick, I got a question from my good friend, right? So I got to cover this, but I've got more ideas that I'd like to throw out so our audience can hear you explain this. But do you believe, or do you know with absolute certainty that non-duality is true?
I think absolute certainty, as conceptually defined, is by definition impossible. Of course not. I am a monkey, a primate evolved on an irremarkable planet of an irremarkable galaxy. How can I be absolutely certain of anything?
You're pretty highly confident. Where would you be on a scale from 1 to 100? Let's just say on confidence. I love this, by the way, because you're showing...
On the basis of what we know, and on the basis of our logic, our consensus, logical axioms, we can clearly devise what the best option on the table is, without any doubt. So I could tell you that I am certain that analytic idealism, insofar as I can discern, is the most plausible option on the table. Am I absolutely certain that it is true? No. But I am certain it is the best option on the table today, on the basis of what we think we know.
If you were to put a number on a guess, I know that nobody's like nailing you to a cross on this. It's just, if you could put a number on it, where would you put your number on confidence and say, this is where I'd say in your own perception?
Okay. I would bet my life on analytic idealism being true. I would bet the lives of everybody I care about, including myself, on mainstream physicalism not being true.
Wow. Okay, that seems pretty confident.
Which doesn't mean that I am absolutely certain.
Yeah, I mean, you're pretty confident though. That's a pretty high confidence level. Dude, let me just put this little analogy for the audience here. I have 4 dogwood trees outside in the front yard, and inside my house, if one of them fell, I wouldn't hear it. But does it actually make noise? And so I think you've gone on record saying no, if I'm not mistaken. But like when I walk outside, my tree's there. Like it's almost like saying the same thing. Like if I go inside, does my tree still exist in the front yard? Like, is it still there? And I've had these trees since I was a little kid. And I'm thinking, Bernardo, but I hope you don't mind me using the first name. I'm sorry.
No, you should. I feel funny when people call me Dr. Kastrup or something.
But seriously, my trees are out there in the front yard. I walk out there all the time. I climbed on them as kids, and now they're bigger. And are they there? Do they exist? Do they make a noise when I'm not next to them? And what's going on?
It's simpler than you think. It sounds like a sophisticated thing to think about because it's a linguistic misunderstanding. Let's unpack this. The world as it is in itself exists whether we are perceiving it or not. It doesn't care that there's a human being or a living person observing or measuring it. The world as it is in itself is there, is always there, and it holds its own state. But the world as it is in itself is not those 4 trees. What you call a tree is a representation of a part of the world as it is in itself on the internal dashboard of dials that we call the screen of perception. See what I mean? Mm-hmm. So if the physical world is the position of the little needles on the dials on the dashboard, then the physical world can only exist if something is being measured, because the dials show measurements, right?
Right.
So what you call the trees do not exist until they are perceived, because they are the result of perception. They are what appears on the dials after you've measured the world as it is in itself. Physicality, the physical world, is the dashboard of dials, taking measurements of what the world really is in and of itself. So if nobody's taking a measurement, there is nothing on the dashboard of measuring dials. Of course not. There's nothing counterintuitive about it. If the tree is a position of the needles on the dials of the dashboard, the tree is not there if you're not measuring it. The dials will show nothing. But what the trees represent the underlying reality that appears to measurement or observation as the tree, that of course is there. It doesn't care whether you're measuring it or not. Look, if you're looking at a radar screen on an airport control tower, what you see on that radar screen is a representation of the airplanes in the air. Now you call those representations the tree and you turn off the radar system. The trees disappeared. Those representations disappear. But the planes didn't fall off the sky. The planes are there, whether you're measuring them through a radar or not. The point I am making is we do not have a transparent window into the world to see the plane. We do not have that. Evolution didn't equip us with that because that would be our end. It would literally kill us. We would dissolve into an entropic soup and be unable to take decisions. So we do not have a transparent windscreen into the world. All we have is the radar screen and the other measurement instruments, the other dials. We call these dials vision, hearing, tasting, and so forth. So if the tree is what appears on the screen of perception, it's not there when you're not looking, for the same reason that the radar screen goes blank if you turn the radar off. But the thing that is represented on the radar screen as what you call the tree, that thing is there, and it doesn't care about you.
Interesting. Like half that stuff was like whew, really complex for me to try and grab. But we have a super chat from Dennis R. Lecker. He's a good friend of mine. Appreciate the super chat. Is Bernardo aware of Persig's MOQ, i.e. chaos, inorganic, organic, social, and intellectual, as these relate to evolutionary levels?
I am not.
I am not either. Dennis, you're going to have to message me later on about this. I'm not familiar with it. Appreciate the honesty.
Before you get the next one, you said it flew over your head. It's really simple. What you think is the world is a dashboard of dials. The real world
in my
is behind
head,
that.
Right? In my head. A dashboard of dials for my perception, so to speak, right?
It's not in your head because your head is itself something that appears on the dashboard of dials. In your mind. So imagine that you are flying an airplane and somebody paints the windows black. You can't see outside. All you have is your dashboard of instruments. You can still fly safely and land. We call it flying by instruments. You are flying by instruments right now. You've never had direct access to the world. You do not have a transparent window into the world. What you call the world is how the actual world presents itself on those dashboard, on that dashboard of dials.
Which we call senses.
Which you call the screen of perception. All you have is the dashboard of dials. You cannot peek directly into the world. Evolution did not give you a transparent window. It would literally kill you. There would be no upper bound in the dispersion of your inner states. You would dissolve into an entropic soup. You wouldn't be able to survive evolution by natural selection. There would be too much data to make sense of. You would grind to a halt and die of starvation. So all you have is a dashboard. What you call the physical world is not the world as it is in itself. It's your measurements of it. The world as it is in itself is right on the other side of the dashboard. It's outside the airplane. It's not a different reality, a different realm, a different dimension. No, you are in it. It's right under your nose. But you do not have a transparent window into it. You're locked into that cockpit with only the dashboard of dials. But you can fly safely and land safely.
Interesting. This is well, you know, I never really thought of things like this. It just makes me think outside of the box a little and what I'm used to trying to exercise in my thinking. Let me ask you this. If we were to play just a hypothetical game and I were to ask you, what's the best argument for materialism? And you were to still for materialism, the best argument, like you've heard, I'm sure you heard a ton of arguments from different angles. What would you say personally is your, like, the best argument if you were to try and put on the materialist hat, so to speak, and say, I'm going to try, this is your best bet? Or another way of phrasing it would be this: what would it take? Like, what would you need to see, or what would convince you that that was something that was plausible? Not saying that you got any certainty in it, but that was plausible, because you are a complex guy. I seriously, I couldn't, I ask these questions as a simple-minded, Joe Schmo here, asking somebody like you who's really into philosophy, and I don't know half the language of philosophy. I'm a basic guy when it comes to this stuff. What would it take, or what's the best argument?
I understand the motivation of what you're asking. I understand what you're coming from, but there is a point you get to in life when you're thinking about these things, that although you still have doubts about certain things, there are things that are ridiculous enough that you just completely discard them. And that's materialism for me. I
Wow.
don't think there is a single good argument for it. But if I would, I'll play your game.
What would it take
If
then, I guess, since it's ridiculous? Like, what would you need to see for you to go, that would lead me in that direction more than...
It's
'cause you...
impossible because it's not an empirical factor. Materialism is reduced to absurdity by the hard problem of consciousness. So there's nothing empirically. I mean, it would take literally a miracle for me to take it seriously, because it's outright silly. It's a political maneuver of the Enlightenment movement 300-400 years ago, which stuck, and nobody thinks it through anymore. Look, on the face of it, pretend that I weren't a philosopher and I hadn't thought these things through, and I were just, I don't know, an engineer, but not an AI engineer, because AI engineers tend to think these things through. I would say the correlations between brain activity and inner experience. For instance, the fact that we know that if a neurosurgeon has your skull open and poking around your brain with an electric probe, he can induce visions and movements and all kinds of experiences. That, at a very superficial level, may lead one to think that there is an arrow of causation between a physical state, say the neuroscientist or the surgeon poking inside your brain, or you drinking alcohol, or somebody punching you in the face, and an inner experience. But this very thought is based on so much question begging and unexamined assumptions that it's not a serious thought if you think it through. But anyway, okay, if you force me against the wall with a gun in my head and say you need to say something, then that's what I would say.
Okay. So, like, I recently interviewed Dr. or Professor Mark Solms. I don't know if you know who that is. He wrote The Hidden Spring. Well, he's a neuroscientist, or what is it? I can't remember exactly his technical term, but yeah, he kind of delves into this. He thinks that the brainstem plays a huge part into this. But I guess my question would be, science and philosophy sounds like you're trying to find where they match. You're trying to do both in a way. A lot of philosophers really are philosophers and they philosophize. They don't, from what I hear, they're not really big on the science side of things. You're trying to see both, right? You're trying to connect both worlds.
I don't do science anymore. But of course, my philosophy is informed by science, because if I have a theory about what nature is that contradicts the behavior of nature as we know from science, then that theory is wrong. And there is no salvation. I mean, theory has to match reality, and not reality be changed to match theory. So I don't do neuroscience. I am a critic of neuroscience, meaning that there are certain studies that I think are great, well designed and informative, and we can safely derive conclusions from them. There are other studies that I think are incredibly metaphysically biased. There is a lot of attempt to sort of try to prove one's own hypothesis through experimentation instead of doing an experiment and learning what it tells you about nature. I think this kind of bias is today very prevalent in psychedelic research, which has come to a point now that I think is ludicrous. It's outright ludicrous. 50 years from now, we will look back and go like, oh my God, how could that have ever happened? I mean, the bias is in your face. It's just extreme. So
I've had my
not
fair share of psychedelics in the past, so I know you will catapult to a new place.
Yeah, but the way they're trying to explain the psychedelic experience based on physicalist hypotheses is ludicrous now. They found an effect that is statistically significant, but it is a piece and tiny effect. And the effect is the following: the amount of noise, of disorganization in your brain increases by 0.0005 in a scale of 0 to 100 during a psychedelic trip on average. So trying to explain the phenomenology of a psychedelic trip by a nearly indetectable amount of increase in the level of noise, background noise in your brain, is ludicrous. I mean, it's surreal that this is happening. It not only defies plausibility, it's on the border of the ridiculous. And this stuff gets published in
Were you a
Nature.
fan? Were you a fan of Terence McKenna?
I heard a lot of stuff from Terence. I read a book by him, but that was several years ago. I did
just
not
figured.
follow in that.
He was a big proponent, you know. He's big on the whole psychedelic thing. Let me. I'm trying to play things a little different than everyone you've interviewed, because it's like, it's hard to, you know, I could interview you and do the same thing that everyone sees on every other channel, but I'm like taking this at a different angle. Who would you say are your number one opponents in the field when it comes to your research? Like, who are the guys right now that you clash with the most in terms of they're trying to compete with your ideas? And, you know,
the guys who clash with me the most are not my best opponents.
okay.
I would respect having a discussion with David Chalmers, who is open to my ideas, but doesn't outright endorse them. I respect Dave. He says things that I totally disagree with. He says, for instance, that it should be possible for us to artificially create consciousness in a silicon computer. At least he said that in 2017. I don't know where his state of thinking is right now. So I have some deep disagreements with him, and at the same time that I have profound respect and admiration for him. So I would love engaging with him. The people who I actually engage with are more frequently are illusionists, people who say that consciousness is, in a certain sense, an illusion, which I think is the most stillborn idea in the history of human thought, not only in the history of philosophy. The Daniel Dennett school, or militant materialists like Jerry Coyne, who attacked me a couple of times. But it's highly entertaining to see that. It plays right into my hands, because Jerry, for instance, he has no clue what mainstream physicalism is. He's defending something without understanding what he's defending. So he contradicts all over the place the very thing he is defending. And it's
Wow.
it's wonderful to watch that happen. And discussions with illusionists or even neuroscientists. There is this neuroscientist from Stanford. I criticized him last year or the year before. Early last year. And he replied, and then I replied to him. I forgot his name. He has an Italian name. Anyway, those are the most frequent engagements, but they are not the best engagements at all. I mean, the way what these people argue sort of makes my point better than I can make my own point myself. I have had a debate with Michael Shermer and Leonard Mlodinov several years ago, 2014, I think. But Michael hardly opened his mouth. Leonard engaged with me. That was relatively interesting discussion, but it stops short of the better issues, the more in-depth issues. I think you will find that the people who are most vocal, the militants, they are the ones that understand the least what's going on, because they are motivated by trying to carve out a space of meaning for themselves in the world, by coming across as some kind of elite, as somebody who has achieved closure, and you do that by poo-pooing others, and it's a value game. It's not an objective game of reason and evidence. That's why the people who mostly engage with me are not the interesting people. The interesting people, for instance, John Verveek, we had 2 long debates this year, recently. I think total time was like 8 hours, something like that.
Wow.
And we disagree on several points. We agree on a lot of other points. And that was very interesting. But it's rare an engagement like this. Most of my engagements are with this very loud, silly militants who aren't really scientists. They portray themselves as scientists or philosophers, and they are neither. They are just militant mouthpieces, and they do not have any in-depth understanding of the issues at all.
Wow, there's a lot there. Good friend of mine, actually, and I've seen a couple questions. I probably could scroll up, but
wait, I remember the name. Michael Graziano from Stanford.
Oh, you remember him now?
Yeah, Michael Graziano, a neuroscientist from Stanford. I mean, just type my name and his name, and you see a written exchange on the website of the Institute of Art and Ideas. If you want to see how his position makes no sense at all, read his reply to me. I mean, his reply is enough. I mean, you don't even need to see my rejoinder, because
Right.
his reply sort of makes my case better than I could possibly make myself.
Interesting. Digital Gnosis asked a question here, and the reason why I thought this question was important is I am going to be interviewing Graham Oppy. I'm sure you know who he is or you've heard of him.
No, actually
Uh,
not.
okay, he's a
Excuse
philosopher in
my
Australia.
ignorance.
No. I kind of figured philosophers all know philosophers and stuff, but I guess there's so many out there. There's no telling. He says, "Would you be interested in discussing theory comparison of idealism versus materialism with Graham Oppy?" And I mean, that'd be a really cool conversation because I know he's very respectful. By the way, he's not like a.
Oh, I don't mind that, and I actually prefer people who are really all out. I enjoy that.
Yeah, but I don't really. I like to actually learn something from the conversations, and that's why the whole.
Well, sometimes you learn the most when you really have a gloves-off engagement. So that's why I say I tend to enjoy that, because you waste very little time with pleasantries, if you know what I mean, with
Yeah, that's
protocol.
true.
You go
Good point.
straight, go for the neck straight, and let's see. If he's a philosopher, a qualified philosopher, I don't care whether people are famous or not. But if he has a doctorate in philosophy and he's a materialist, I would certainly be interested in having that debate. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, that's a good question. I'm interested in actually.
I can't debate everybody who wants to debate me. So that's why I said, if he's a qualified philosopher, that you can show me, he has credentials. He's not just, somebody who has an axe to grind and wants to be on stage with you. Then yeah, I would debate him. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I've got scholars that I talk to all the time who actually are like, hey, does he have a PhD? If not, I'm not really wanting to waste my time.
Yeah, look, this is a valid filter to apply, and often we do not have any other filter to apply other than doing extensive background research on the person. It's too much time, but it is a very flawed filter. I just want to put it out there. There are people with PhDs out there who are idiots, and idiocy with a PhD is weaponized idiocy. So we have to be careful about that. I think some of the best people for me to debate would be people who don't even have a degree on philosophy. The problem is I cannot identify them before I actually debate them. And I can't debate everyone. I just will not do anything else in my life. Right. So I apply the filter, but with a lot of reticence. This is a bad filter. Unfortunately, it's the only one we have.
Let me ask you this. You brought up one of the guys that respects your work but doesn't endorse it. He says he thinks that we can maybe potentially create consciousness from computers, silicone, something. If that were to happen, I keep playing these hypotheticals for you, which is like probably just, in your head, just like, come on. But I want you to play with me here. If we were able to produce that, would that potentially make you think matter preceded mind?
The problem is how would we prove that? Because I think, look, I have been an AI researcher. I still build computers here behind me. I build my own 8-bit computers from scratch, from the gate level up for fun. I have a background in AI, and I do not doubt for a second that AIs will eventually really pass the Turing test. There is a claim that one of them already has passed. I think AI will pass the Turing test, and AI will claim to be conscious because either it will be explicitly programmed to do so, or it will learn from its environment in such a way that it will replicate our behavior.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that it's not conscious from within. It's the behavior that leads us to think, okay, that might be conscious. Now, in nature at large, I think behavior is a valid cue for the presence of consciousness inside or not. But when it comes to engineering, then it's no longer the case, because these things are engineered to look human. They are engineered to copy us in all the ways that matter, so we can communicate more easily with them. So then the extrinsic appearance, the behavior, is no longer a valid cue to know whether it's really conscious from inside or not, because it has been built to be like that. That the behavior is like that is no longer necessarily a reflection of inner consciousness. It's a reflection of ourselves, because the machines were built to reflect ourselves.
This brings me to something, I guess, just to the jugular. If we could, would that change? And that's the hard part. You're pointing out something that is an issue. We would just be seeing our own reflection here. And how would we know this is actually a self-aware conscious entity here, or a conscient, or a sentient being or something like that? We don't have that evidence. But if we were, which how the hell would we prove that? Would that make you think, okay, hold on, we could produce minds out of
Look, what you're doing, Derek, is you're saying, if we could prove that you are wrong, would you admit that you are wrong? Yes.
You caught me, man. You caught me. Okay. So I've got a super chat here I want to get, and then I've got a couple questions, and then we can keep moving forward. Constellation Pegasus, thank you so much for the super chat, my friend. I really appreciate the love. He says, I'm late. Are you describing Niels Bohr description of quantum mechanics, the collapse of the wave? Do you know that?
Niels Bohr. No. Look, this is an open question in quantum mechanics. How do you come from pure quantum states, which a superposition? How do you come from a coherent superposition to the observables, to the classic world, to mass, charge, momentum, spin? How do you come from that superposition to the world that we actually see around ourselves? There is no consensus answer to that question today, where there is no absolute clarity why, how, where, and by which means that transition takes place. Clearly, some transition takes place. My own view is that the notion of collapse will ultimately prove not to be literally correct. What's happening here is not a collapse. I tend to align myself more with the interpretation of Carlo Rovelli, the relational interpretation of quantum mechanics. I am sympathetic to cubism, and I am very sympathetic to an emerging idea that's coming out of the Austrian Academy of Sciences through the work of physicist Marcus Miller, in which he proposes that what we call the physical world emerges from ourselves. That it's not an objective world, and that seems to solve several problems in foundations of physics. But what I'm putting forward does not depend on a specific answer to this. Clearly, some answers would invalidate what I'm saying. For instance, if the Broglie-Bohm interpretation turned out to be true, now we know it's not, it has been invalidated, but if it had turned out to be true, it would contradict what I'm saying. But most of the options on the table today do not. Personally, regardless of how that transition happens, I think what it represents is the following. What we call perfect quantum states, coherent quantum states, or a quantum superposition, it's our best description of the world as it is in itself, regardless of observation. And what we call the classical world of tables and chairs and objects with defined characteristics, position, mass in space-time, that is the result of a measurement of the world as it is in itself. In other words, the physical world is what appears on the dashboard. And therefore, by definition, the physical world is a result of measurement, because what the dials show are measurements. And those measurements do not capture all there is to know about the world as it is in itself. In the same way that the instrument panel on an airplane doesn't tell you all there is to know about the storm outside. It tells you what is salient, what's relevant, but it doesn't tell you all there is to know about the storm. And that's why we have this transition between our description of the world as it is in itself, which entails all kinds of superposed possibilities, superposed potentials, and the much more compact thing that appears on the dashboard of dials upon measurement, which is the particular facet of the world as it is in itself that presents itself to our observation, and therefore it's a subset of it. And that's this transition that we now, in the culture at large, tend to call the collapse of the wave function. I think most physicists today tend not to use anymore this metaphor of a collapse. We understand now that the issue is a little bit more nuanced than that.
This is highly complex, by the way. Digital Gnosis asks one more time, wouldn't it change his credence if there isn't any observation that Kastrup's theory of idealism is incompatible with? Why do the observations matter?
Oh, there are lots of observations that matter. For instance, Foundations of Physics is showing us today that what we call physical observables, the properties we attribute to matter, like mass or weight, momentum or speed in a certain direction, spin, electric charge, all these observables, physicality in general, that physicality does not have standalone reality. It's a series of experiments that began in the late 70s and arguably has been now concluded, having closed every imaginable loophole in the period between 2015 and 2018. Technically, I am referring to the experimental confirmation of Bell's and Leggett's inequalities. That experimental confirmation, which is now beyond any remotely reasonable doubt, showing us that what we call the physical world does not have standalone reality. It's not fundamental. It's basically the appearance of something else, a deeper layer of reality, which is itself then by definition non-physical, because all the properties of physicality are in this upper layer. They are the observables, the thing that do not have standalone reality. So either this conclusion from the experiments or the only alternative that is still on the table, the alternative is to think that, okay, this physical world does have standalone reality, but there is a practical infinity of other physical worlds that pop into existence out of nothing, every infinitesimal fraction of a femtosecond, for which we have precisely zero empirical evidence. Now you take your pick. I've taken my pick.
So this jabs into kind of people like Lawrence Krauss, a theoretical physicist, who believe.
Lawrence Krauss I don't take very seriously, but people like the guy who took the chair that in the University of California, I forgot his name. How can I forget his name? There are respected physicists who put this alternative forward with a straight face, who think that parting with the tenets of physicalism, which is a philosophy, a metaphysics. Physics does not depend on a metaphysics, but parting with that metaphysics inherited from culture is so counterintuitive, so psychologically unacceptable, that they prefer to take for granted the alternative, that alternative being the most inflationary thought that a human being could possibly conceive, the most complex theory, the most non-parsimonious theory conceivable to the human mind, which is that infinite universes pop into existence every infinitesimal fraction of a second for no reason, out of nowhere, and for which we have absolutely zero empirical evidence. I mean, I find it such a betrayal of the psychological state of our culture today that a person prefers what I just said, an otherwise intelligent and educated person prefers what I just said over the simple, obvious alternative. Physical reality is an appearance. There is a deeper layer to reality. Therefore, what we think had standalone reality doesn't. It's just an image. It's like the image of a football match on your television. It's not the game in itself, it's an image. See, the game is not inside your television set. It's somewhere else. The television set is only displaying an image. There is a deeper layer, the game, the world as it is in itself. It's much more reasonable to grant that, especially because it dovetails well with neuroscience, it dovetails well with what we are finding out in analytic philosophy, dovetails very well with everything else. But no, they still prefer the fairy tale of gazillions of universes without any empirical evidence whatsoever. It's more digestible to their biased psychology.
So this is a hypothetical as well, but this is going into your world, not against what you actually think is the case. Consciousness. This is speculative to get your thoughts on this, but do you think it's aware like we are? Is it like one conscious mind and we all play part of that mind? I mean, how are you viewing this consciousness? And then, by the way, the question would be, prior to material, this universe's existence, we can measure back, see that it started at some point. Prior to that, what do you think as a philosopher? You're not a religious guy. You're not like, I tote Jesus, or I'm spitting, you need to follow this particular God or anything like that. What do you think it is, if you will?
Is it a mind? Yes, I think it's a mind in the very specific sense that it is experiential in nature. In other words, there is something it is like to be the inanimate universe as a whole. There is something, anything, it is like to be the inanimate universe as a whole. In other words, it has experience of some form. Does that mean that it has experiences similar to ours? No, it doesn't mean that. It most likely doesn't have, because the experiences we have today are the product of our need to survive and evolve over 3.5 billion years on this planet in a limited ecosystem. So our mentation has evolved in a form that is adapted to this ecosystem circumstances, so to say. And the mind at large underlying the universe has undergone no such selective or survival pressures, so it doesn't need to be reactive. It doesn't
for
need
all
to
we
have
know, it's not matter, right? Like it itself does not constitute physical property necessarily. Not saying it couldn't outside of the universe, but
I don't see a distinction between mind and matter, in the sense that for me, matter is just an appearance in mind for mental processes. What we call matter, matter is basically what appears on the screen of perception. The things you see, hear, touch, things that have temperature that you can feel, things that you taste, smell, that's matter. And under mainstream physicalism, there is an extra conceptual definition of that. It has to be purely quantitative. But what appears on the screen of perception, I don't deny. I don't deny that there is this bottle. Now, you want to colloquially call it material? Fine, I'm okay with that. Matter exists in that colloquial sense, not in the strict conceptual sense of mainstream physicalism. But yeah, there is matter. What we call matter, I think, is an appearance in mind of certain mental processes. So is the inanimate universe material? It isn't material in the sense of mainstream physicalism. I think it's qualitative, not purely quantitative. And it presents itself to our observation as what we call matter. In other words, what we call matter is the way the inner mental processes of mind at large present themselves to our observation. Matter is what their inner consciousness looks like when observed from our perspective. Now, observation is also mental. The screen of perception is also mental. So what you have is a set of mental qualities that are inherent and immanent in the inanimate universe, modulating another set of qualities, which is our screen of perception, the dashboard of our dials. So all there is experience. And what we call matter is just a certain type of experience.
Okay, got a super chat, and then I got another question. You get my mind thinking of some stuff. Okay, Constellation Pegasus, thank you for the super chat again, my friend. Considering the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and Aaron Schrodinger's equation,
Erwin Schrödinger.
Do you think particles are waves only?
These are all descriptions, the wave-particle duality. When we're not observing, particles are waves, but when we look at them, they turn out to be particles. These are descriptions. What I'm putting forward is a hypothesis for what things are. And of course, I take as my cue the best of our descriptions of their behavior. But waves and particles are descriptions of behavior. They are metaphors. Because you see, even if you say that when we observe a particle, it actually is a particle, even when we say that, it's just a metaphor, because we know that even observable particles or observed particles are patterns of excitation of an underlying quantum field. The way we talk about these things in popular culture is rather superficial. If you dig a little bit more, you will see that it's consensus amongst physicists today, well, not 100% consensus, but a broad consensus, that there are no such things as spatially bound elementary subatomic particles with discrete spatial boundaries. That's just a metaphor. It's a way of thinking. Even observed particles are just sort of ripples in a quantum field. And of course, when you see a ripple in water, you can point at it and say, there is the ripple. You can identify its location. You can attribute physical properties to it. It has this speed, it's going that direction, it's this height, this has this width. But there is nothing to the ripple but the lake in which it ripples. The only thing that actually exists is the lake. The ripple is just an identifiable pattern of excitation, a behavior of the lake, something the lake does. In exactly the same way, today we know that, our best description of reality today is that there are 17 different quantum fields. And they are spatially unbound. They span across the entire universe. And what we call discrete particles are just ripples on those fields. They don't really exist in and of themselves, just like the ripple doesn't exist in and of itself. You can't fish the ripple out of the lake because the ripple is a movement of the lake. In the same way, what we call particles, even the observed ones, are just movements of the underlying quantum fields.
Question: what differs from your view and panpsychism? Can you rip panpsychism in half real quick from your worldview or your perception here?
Panpsychism is the notion that in addition to its normal physical properties like mass, charge, spin, matter also has fundamental experiential properties, such as qualitative feelings. So panpsychism is the idea that matter is conscious. What I'm saying is that what we call matter is how certain conscious processes appear. Matter has no existence in and of itself. It's just an image, a representation, an appearance. For the panpsychist, the constitutive panpsychism, there are many forms of panpsychism. For the panpsychist, matter really exists. Those elementary particles really exist. And by the way, they must be spatially bound. Panpsychism assumes that elementary subatomic particles are actually real little balls with defined spatial boundaries, which contradicts quantum field theory. So panpsychism is physically incoherent. It doesn't hold water if you go deeper into the physics. But it's the notion that matter has consciousness, as opposed to matter being the image of certain conscious processes. So what I like to say is that matter is in consciousness, not that matter is conscious. These are completely different things. The panpsychist says matter is conscious, fundamentally. I say matter is in consciousness. It's an appearance in consciousness of other processes in consciousness.
If I may turn into my 7-year-old for a second here, because they have the best questions, the ones you can't answer really, but the ones you got to take a jab at, and you give them a myth so that they are comfortable and they like what you tell them. If I was a 7-year-old and I were asking you with all this complex talk, why do you think we exist? Why do you think this world is? Okay, like a basic fundamental why question. Why did it take so long for us to come onto the scene, and so long through these processes to naturally selection and whatnot to be where we are now? What's the purpose of all of this in your worldview?
Yeah. If I say that the inanimate universe is just the extrinsic appearance of, universal conscious processes, let's call it a universal thought. Then the fact that the universe is dynamic, it's behaving. It seems to have exploded from an infinitesimal point 13.8 billion years ago. Galaxies have formed, so it's doing something. So if that's the appearance, then what is going on from within? I think from within, what these images suggest is that the universal mind, albeit being instinctive, just a natural mind, not a mind like ours, it doesn't seem to be very comfortable or content, because otherwise it wouldn't change its state. And the fact that its appearance is changing all the time suggests very strongly that there is a continuous change in its internal state. So it suggests to me that it's not quite comfortable. There is a instinctive impetus towards change. Now, I don't think it has a plan, that it knows where it's going and how to achieve it, because, this kind of premeditated thinking, higher level thinking, and metacognitive thinking is something that cost nature 3.5 billion years on this planet to evolve. In other words, us. So if it were there from the beginning, why all this carnage for 3.5 billion years on this planet? So I don't think it has a plan, but it's uncomfortable. And as it is uncomfortable, it moves instinctively. And that movement has eventually led to us, with our ability to metacognize and contemplate the universe and say, this is what's happening. Is this good or not?
I got to take you there, man. This is great. Because this really makes God, for people who are trying to wrap their heads around and make God is this omni that, everything, all these attributes. He does it, like it's almost like why is he shocked in the biblical narratives, right? Anthropomorphism. But anyway, getting into, well, I'll take my friend's question here, Digital Gnosis, real quick, because he's actually interviewed you before. Actually, I don't know if you remember being interviewed by him, but MythVision podcast. Hold on, you just had one about you asked me about the Catholic Church and I hit the wrong one. Okay, dang it. You keep on asking questions, you guys. You're killing me. I guess we'll go with this one since it's on the screen. I wanted to play with you on this whole God thing because this is just how this works. But I'm going to take questions. Why is conscious experience temporal? Is time something over and above the mental in Kastrup's view?
No. I am with Kant and Schopenhauer and certain modern contemporary neuroscientists who are figuring out that time is extremely subjective and malleable, and with Einstein that space-time can be bent and twisted, and with the guys doing the most promising grand unification theories today, loop quantum gravity, which postulates that time is not fundamental, that it's something that emerges out of quantum processes. So we have accumulated evidence from independent areas of investigation that show us that time or space are not a fundamental objective scaffolding of nature out there. It's a largely malleable, emergent, subjective thing. So if you ask me, I am with Kant. Space and time are modes of cognition. They are part of the dashboard. They are the little dimensions, extensions in the dials, in the dashboard. They allow us to cognize what's going on more easily, because if everything were happening here and now, it's too much. It would be cognitively overwhelming and useless. So what our cognition does is to spread the information about the world into these extensions, these dimensions that we call space-time, in order to facilitate our understanding, our cognition of it. So I think time and space are modes of cognition. Therefore, they are in mentality. They don't precede mentation or mentality. They are emergent within mental processes. They are qualities of experience. What we call time and space are qualities.
So we brought up God, and he says, what is Kastrup's view of Roman Catholic Church? I've seen him tweet opinions about the Vatican II before.
If you ask me about the church as an institution, unfortunately, I would have to say more bad things than good things. Even historically, the Catholic Church has been responsible for some of the greatest atrocities in human history. And I'm not only talking about burning the witches, which is catastrophic enough, or the Crusades, which were even more catastrophic. I mean, what business did we have gathering men from all over the continent to go to a faraway place and kill everybody? I mean, what was that? And that was called by popes, by more than one pope. But even the colonization of the Americas, which are probably the greatest genocide in history, a very slow genocide by depression, anxiety, and meaninglessness, that or outright assassination, like Brazilian Indians used to count in the 6 million. I think now there are 200,000. You have to kill a lot of Indians. And in Spanish, Latin America, there are many original people there that still survive in some way. But we have removed their pride. We have removed their sense of meaning. We have stolen their religion, their symbolism. We have stolen everything that makes their life meaningful. So that's an incredible genocide. And it's not getting, it's gotten better today, partly because the Catholic Church no longer has the power to do what it has instigated or given moral validity to in the past. Slavery, another big one. Black people didn't have souls, according to the Catholic Church at some point. But even today, the focus on morality, this incomprehensible, absolute obsession with sex, all of this is going on while we are actually forgetting what this is all about, which is religion. Religion comes from the Latin religare, to reconnect, to relink. Reconnect to what? Reconnect to our roots, reconnect to transcendence, reconnect to meaning, reconnect to something infinite that we are related to. And that sort of got so dissolved and dispersed in this morass of unjustifiable, arbitrary moral pronouncement and obsession with sexuality and obsession with power and money. And well, I was going to say something, but I'll stop short of that. So I don't have many good things to say about the Catholic Church as an institution back then or now, but I have wonderful things to say about religion. And I have wonderful things to say about the liturgy and the symbolism of Christianity. I think that after 2,000 years, the mythology of Christianity is so embedded in the collective unconscious of the Western mind that if we could get our act together, it would be the healthiest, shortest path towards recovering meaning in the Western world, which is now the whole globe, because we sort of infected the entire globe with our value system. That would be the shortest path, because it's the lowest hanging fruit on the tree. It's something that we are sort of trained from birth to recognize as a map to transcendence, so those symbolisms and the liturgy of Christianity. So I just regret profoundly that the focus is not on liturgy. The focus is on morals, is on sex, is on guilt, is on you go to church and it's like you're on trial. Protestant churches are actually modeled physically after a courtroom. The preacher dresses like a judge. So where is the religion? Where is the religare? I want to go to church on Sunday to reconnect with the roots of transcendence and infinity, where my being is planted. I want to reconnect with that. I want to be helped with having a direct relationship with God through the liturgy, through the symbolism. But what I get instead is mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa. I'm made to feel guilty for a sin committed by my original parents in the Garden of Paradise, which I, for one, interpret in a completely different way. Christianity has even forgot the God of the Old Testament. We now only see God for the summum bonum, the absolute good of the New Testament. And we forgot that God has a shadow. Just read the book of Job. So what I would like is for us to restore religion, true religion, religare, in the full glory of its symbolism and liturgy, instead of literal interpretations, which sort of flatten the myth, make the myth look silly, or this obsession with sexuality. Gosh, even when my hormones are running very high, I'm not so obsessed with sex as the Catholic Church seems to be. It's all about sex, not being able to have sex. And if you go back in history to St. Augustine, I mean, look at how many words he has dedicated to the idea of whether sex is sinful or not, under what conditions it's sinful or not. I mean, it's a long time obsession that I find hard to understand from a psychological point of view. So I would like Christianity to be back. As for the Catholic Church as an institution, yeah, I don't know.
I'd like to make my comment on this. I think there's a place and a time, of course, where humans need to connect. We need to have a way of a communion, and I don't mean that in the like liturgical, you need to eat of my flesh, drink of my blood, so to speak, even though the symbolism's there, there's meaning and value to these ancient practices. But like when I go to the text, because I'm a big textual guy, right? Like you would do on the philosophy, I'd be big on the theology in the New Testament and things like this, and like broken into this. Paul seems to be obsessed with people not marrying. He thinks the end's about to happen. So like I would want to just get rid of all of that stuff, right? Personally. And I would just say, how can we meet as humans, not inside outside groups, not you're not part of us if you don't think like us. Like, how do we evolve past this tribalism that we've created and allow each person to have importance and meaning and value as human beings, regardless of what they perceive God to be? Don't believe in a God, but believe in what they observe. Doesn't matter. But I feel like I would love to see inherent practice principles that we see Christianity teach, like laying down your life for someone you love. That's one of the most beautiful teachings. My father, being a retired Green Beret, always came home and said, if I die, I did it thinking of you guys. And it was like, okay, there's a value in that. There's something about that that's so powerful. And I think that would be the myth, if you will, and these meaningful lessons I'd like to see carry on. But I would want to strip it of inside outside tendencies, and if you're not doing it the right ways and things like that. I would want to find a way where humans can come together. Don't get me wrong. It's just, I don't think as strong as these systems are, you're going to do that. It's going to take a long time to chisel away that from them. And the Catholic Church is trying to do that stuff. They realize we're losing numbers. This isn't working. They're going to have to figure out a new way to keep up with the modern times. So I got to ask you one more. You said something that just made me think about this mind that we are in or part of. We are aspects of it, if that's a word I can use. It's not comfortable. It's whatever this is. It's constantly doing something to move on. This reminded me of that Men in Black movie at the end when Will Smith goes and opens the locker, or someone did, and then it takes you from this like driving car outward, and you see the universe and the stars and the planets and the galaxies, and then all of a sudden there's an alien playing like marbles with the galaxy against other marbles. This is completely speculation, but it's interesting. Do you think that the mind is eternal, whatever that even means, or do you think something above that potentially it's involved, like we're involved in a bigger form of itself? Does that make sense? Ad infinitum.
There may be a hierarchy of being. The question is it a productive question to speculate much about that in the absence of empirical reasons?
It's fun. It's just fun.
I acknowledge that. It's definitely fun, especially if you are with friends in a weekend and maybe you had a psychedelic trip the day before, which I have done more than once, more than twice. So I'm not saying that in a cynical way. I mean what I'm saying. But when it comes down to, now level-headed philosophy, I tend not to feel motivated to speculate too much about a hierarchy of being. I think ultimately it is a mind. And I think ultimately that mind is instinctive and it's incapable of passing moral judgment. It's incapable of passing value judgments. It doesn't operate according to a value system. It is spontaneous, like lower animals in nature are spontaneous in their behavior, purely instinctive. And I think its discomfort has to do precisely with that. I think mind has an innate tendency to try to figure out itself because it makes itself uncomfortable. I mean, look at us. I mean, we can torture ourselves. Even if everything is objectively okay, we torture ourselves with pessimistic thoughts, with anxiety about the future, with regret about the past, with nihilistic meaninglessness, depression, ennui. We torture ourselves inside our own minds. And what we try to do to overcome that is to sort of take one step higher in our ladder of metacognition, to try to recognize our own thinking, our own feeling, and say, oh, I'm thinking that, I'm feeling that. That's how my mind operates. And that seems to give us some form of step towards comfort. This kind of self-understanding seems to be soothing in a way, because even though you can't change what you really are, you get some form of closure. You get a grip. It's, oh, this is what I'm doing to myself. This is how I'm torturing myself. There is a certain sense of closure that seems to be very attractive. And without meaning to anthropomorphize the cosmic mind, which I think we have every reason to think it's completely unlike a human mind. It's mental, but totally unlike a human mind. If I try to visualize in a sort of human way what it might be trying to do instinctively, spontaneously, not in a premeditated way, is get a grip on itself. Is to figure out, why is it torturing itself? Why am I feeling that? Why is it? What's going on? Know what I mean?
Do you think that other minds with other universes are trying to figure it out as well? And this is pure speculation. I mean, just like multiverse is a speculation, like string theory, there's so many speculations and ideas out there, but like, do you think in your way of viewing this, that there are other minds that haven't figured it out, that have, created their own versions of things like this?
I think postulating fundamentally distinct minds in nature is very problematic, because then you have to make sense of how do they interact with one another? Because if they are fundamentally distinct, there should be no common environment. They are distinct. And then you have to make sense of why would completely distinct minds, things of the same type, pop in nature. You run into all kinds of problems. So you avoid those problems by saying there is at the bottom level of reality is one field of subjectivity, one mind. And then through dissociation, you form the appearance of multiple minds, just like a person with multiple personality disorder thinks itself to be many, to have many alters. And those alters, by the way, they see and interact with each other in the dreaming of a person with dissociative identity disorder. That's research from Harvard Medical School.
Interesting.
Yeah. So dissociation forms the appearance, the cognitive appearance of multiple minds in what is essentially one mind. Because even a person with dissociative identity disorder can be cured and remember being each and every alter as one only mind. And then the question you're asking boils down to, is dissociation hierarchical then? Are we the first level of dissociation, or is there above us a bigger dissociative mind, dissociated from the whole, but of which we are dissociative elements? So you have a sort of a hierarchy of
it's almost like a
dissociation.
virus has gone on since at some point.
Maybe going down the chain, yeah, a sort of a fractal of dissociation. Is it possible? It is possible. It's certainly conceivable. Do we have empirical reasons to entertain this hypothesis seriously? There, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
But I'm just having fun with you. You're too often in your interviews, it's a serious, like down, like language most people don't even understand, and you're taking them into trust me, because I'm guilty.
Sorry about that.
No. I mean, look, it's not my field, right? I wanted to learn from you today. This is not like, I'm not a guy who has the answers or I can compete. I would love to host a discussion / debate, if that's even something that I could do with like Graham Oppie and you or something like that. Someone who knows more about philosophy and such, who has credentials, and I would really like to learn and see how you guys have differences and find out why and things like that. Yeah, but I liked playing around with this because I know a lot of friends of mine who believe that all is consciousness, not like panpsychism, but like we're all part of one collective thing. And they've also done psychedelics, and they felt their experience tells them this to be the case as well through their experience.
I have felt it too.
Yeah, so this is something that I don't knock it out. I'm very skeptical and cautious because I'm a very undereducated, learning as we go type person, and I want to learn all the different areas there can. So I appreciate you joining me today. If there's anyone who has a question, get it now or forever hold your peace, because I am about to close up this live. This has been fantastic. I really do appreciate you, and thank you for taking my questions and the things I'm trying to poke at you. Pretty much just, yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, if there was evidence that could potentially disprove what you believe, would you go and follow that? And yeah, cognitive dissonance, you know what I mean? Like, would you... I don't know.
Yeah, but sure, if there is evidence that contradicts my ideas, I would pursue that, sure. You also asked, what if there were evidence that physicalism is more true? I'm highly skeptical of that, because I think physicalism is internally contradictory. It's not a question of evidence. It's just a bad idea, if you know what I mean, that sort of implodes from within. But just to add something very quick, Derek, I am open to the idea of multiple realms of mind. There might be other realms with different patterns and regularities of behavior. In other words, with different laws of physics, with different laws of logic, with different dissociated beings in it, having a life in that alternative universe. I think that is possible. And I acknowledge that psychedelics provide introspective evidence that is probably the case. But yeah, that's purely subjective evidence. So if it comes to my objective work in philosophy, I wouldn't take that on board. But I will confess to you openly that in my own mind, in a weekend with friends around the fire, I would entertain that easily. Yeah, I would entertain this idea.
Well, thank you for being open and honest. And I'm glad that I hosted you as a skeptic. And this was a really good conversation. We do have a couple questions here real quick, if you don't mind. I'll get the first one here. It's I don't want to butcher your name. What is the metaphysics of turbulence, Mr. Castro?
I don't think turbulence provides evidence for or against any particular metaphysics. Turbulence is a chaotic behavior of nature. Chaotic meaning we can't predict it, even if it is entirely deterministic in principle. Whatever little error happens in the beginning sort of amplifies. So I don't think turbulence requires a special answer on metaphysics. Turbulence is a particular form of behavior in nature that appears on the screen of our perception. It's one that's very hard to predict, to make models of, but I don't see special metaphysical significance in it.
Thank you. Digital Gnosis, MythVision podcast. Is Kastrup worried about some of the Vervaek's pseudoscientific views in his Science of Meaning?
I haven't read that book. I have seen his presentations, and I have not heard anything pseudoscientific coming out of his mouth till now, which is not to say that that has never happened. Having debated him for 8 hours, I personally would be skeptic that Vervaek would entertain anything pseudoscientific. I don't think meaning is pseudoscientific at all, unless you arbitrarily presuppose that science has to be meaningless, which is a tendency in recent times. But I think that's an arbitrary thing to do. I don't think science needs to be meaningless at all. Even though Earth is not the center of the universe, I don't think our understanding of what meaning means today would have this physical correlate of having human beings in the geographical center of the universe. So it's important for us to have meaning in our lives. I think even people who are overtly against meaning, who are cynical, who say that no, there is no meaning to anything, you just have to bite this bullet, you have to be a man and stare the tough facts in the face. In doing this, they are trying to find meaning through a psychological process called fluid compensation, which is when you lose your natural source of meaning, say an identification with transcendence, with teleology, with purpose, when you lose that, you will fluidly compensate and try to find meaning in, for instance, identifying yourself as a tough person, an elite of toughness, of realism differentiated from others. You will find meaning in closure, like it's all shit, but at least I know it. So you get to some meaning, which is the same thing that motivates, parents of soldiers who die in war. They want to have the body back because it provides closure, and closure is a alternative source of meaning. So even people who promote nihilism, covertly, they are just trying to carve out a space of meaning for themselves through fluid compensation, through identifying themselves as tough people who stare the tough facts in the face, and finding some degree of pessimistic, nihilistic closure. So we are all trying to find meaning, even the ones who deny the existence of meaning. Meaning is a given of nature. It's a fundamental scientific fact that meaning as an experience exists in all of us.
Two more, and then that's it. Free will, does it exist?
I think it's a red herring. So I will not answer the question either in the positive or the negative. Free will requires, what we tend to think of as free will, requires something that isn't random and isn't deterministic either, but there is nothing in between, randomness and determinism. I think our will as people is not free in the sense that we don't choose what we will. You don't choose your desires, you don't choose your fears, you don't choose your preferences. You may be free to act upon your desires, but you are not free to choose your desires. And that's something Schopenhauer already said over 200 years ago. We are not free to will. So in that sense, we do not have free will. But at the level of a universal mind, by definition, there are no external forces from the point of view of that universal mind. It's all there is. So whatever it does is determined by itself. It's determined by its own nature. It's not determined from an external force, because there are no external forces if you are the whole and all. From that sense, at that level, the universal mind has free will, because whatever happens, happens by virtue of it and not by any external force. But even the universal mind is not free to choose what it wills. It wills what it wills because it is what it is. So the will is not free in that sense, but the will of the universal mind is free in the sense that it does not have to compete against any external forces. So you could say, yeah, the universal mind is free in that sense, that whatever it happens, it's the exercise of its own will, but it's not free in the sense that its own will is determined by what it is. It does not pick and chooses what it wills what it does. And the result is the universe from the Big Bang until now.
And then last of all, this one is right in my wheelhouse, just wanting to ask, and I saw a few people hint at this. Would you label yourself, if you were to try and label I know you probably don't care for labels, but to try and put yourself in a position, would you label yourself pantheistic?
You correctly guessed that I don't care for labels, but I
Right.
understand that labels have some value in conveying a complex content in a single word.
Right.
So if I had to adopt a label, I would consider myself a panentheistic.
And what is panentheistic?
A pantheism says God is immanent in the universe, but there is nothing more to God other than what appears to us as the universe. A panentheist would say God is both immanent in the universe we know, but also transcends it. There is more to God than what we can see in the universe visible through our senses. And the reason I would certainly be a panentheistic if compared to a pantheistic is that I don't think our dashboard of dials is complete. Monkeys that evolved on planet Earth have not evolved to pick out every salient aspect of reality. There is something that flies totally over our heads. We don't even suspect, even though it's right under our noses, because we didn't evolve to pick it out of what's going on. So, and that would then perforce be part of God if you equate God to this naturalistic, instinctive field of subjectivity that I'm talking about. That God would be more like, the semi-conscious God of the Old Testament than the summum bonum of the New Testament. So under these definitions, I would say you can, with a lot of care and with lots of disclaimers, you could say I am a kind of panentheistic, a panentheist.
Like Spinoza's God?
Spinoza, it's a question. Was him a pantheist or a panentheist? I would tend to say that he was actually a panentheist because he admitted to the possibility of infinite modes, including modes that we don't have access to. So that suggests that Spinoza's God is not only immanent in the world, it transcends the world. So yes, I would say, although there is polemic about it, I would say Spinoza was a panentheist. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Kastrup, thank you so much. Remember, I got the Patreon. I'm going tomorrow to interview Dr. Goodacre. I've got multiple interviews coming up here soon. Elaine Pagels, flying to go see John J. Collins, Joel Baden, other people about a lot of this material that we do on MythVision. You guys join the Patreon. You can definitely see that stuff early. Remember, Dr. Kastrup also has a Twitter. I don't have it pulled up here. I was going to pull it up, but it's in the description down below. Also, he has a 6-part series on this very subject that we discussed today, and you guys can go through. It's all free. It's at this website. You just hit home. It's the first thing that pops up right here. You just click it, and it's going to take you here. 6-part series. You can actually learn more from him if you're interested in hearing his thoughts and understanding metaphysical idealism as he has presented it today. And he has a YouTube channel. Make sure you hit that bell so you're notified whenever he drops a video. If you guys, whether you like to or not, I'm actually going to be trying to set up a discussion with you and Graham Oppie. But if you do like this, stay tuned because I do want to have a conversation with him and others that may not agree to see what they disagree on and why. You'll definitely want your coffee. You're definitely going to need something to pay attention and try to keep up with what you guys say. I know I'm speaking because I'm not a hypocrite. I'm talking about myself. And I knew this was going to be a mind buster. So I really do appreciate everything that you did. I have to ask this. My friend here says, ask him about Cerberus.
Cerberus is a multiprocessor 8-bit computer I built this year from scratch as an educational platform because it annoys me a lot. This nonsense that is being, that has been spewing out of Ph.D. computer scientists today who actually do not have any idea how a computer actually works and how it's built because computer science has become now so abstract that computer scientists don't know how computers work. And they keep spewing out this nonsense of uploading our consciousness to a computer or computers becoming conscious. And you can only do that if you don't understand what a computer is. So I took it upon myself to build a little computer from scratch, from the gate level up, no levels of abstraction. I'm not buying anything pre-made. I'm not assembling a PC. No, I designed everything, the chips, I designed the board, and I made everything available on a public repository, GitHub, for people to download, build their own, and then they see gate by gate how a computer works, how it's built, how it's put together. and I named it Cerberus 2080. And there have been some people who already built it. It's going to be in some famous YouTube shows soon. But it's a hobby, but it's also philosophy, because you see, there is a philosophical objective behind it. I want to demystify computers, so people stop thinking this nonsense that you get on series like Black Mirror or movies on conscious AI, that computers have anything to do with conscious inner life. Computers are just tools, very deterministic, predictive tools. You can build a computer with pressure valves, pipes, and water instead of electronics. The only difference is the former would be the size of the planet. But there is nothing more to computers than what you can do with pipes, water, and pressure valves. And that's what I'm trying to get across with Cerberus.
Thank you so much. Thanks, guys, for all the questions and for tuning in. Everybody who hit that like button, showing positivity. And of course, even those who disagree, I really do appreciate you guys, obviously, the most, because you're the reason that I keep searching. I keep trying to understand. One of the best things that I think you said for me, like that I really enjoyed, was this mind is trying to figure itself out. And to me, that just is like, that sounds like a accurate portrayal of this universe to some degree. It's kind of like, what is this? What are we doing here? I really appreciate you. Let's do this again sometime and get a discussion going. So everybody go into the description. I've got a recommended books link. He's got a ton of books on Amazon. Just click the link, go get you a book. Definitely read up on his material. Even if you disagree, I'd be interested in having people who disagree come on and say why you disagree. Write me, email me, Derek@MythVisionPodcast.com. And thank you so much, Dr. Kastrup. Let's do this again.
Great pleasure. I'm very happy to have done this with you. Let's do it again. Yeah.
Yes. And never forget, we are MythVision.